Okay, zone 2.
My name is Kristen Schramm. I am from Springfield, Illinois. I am a proud shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway. In light of the upcoming capital gains tax reduction, do you envision any increased selling pressure, such as buying opportunities for Berkshire stock?
Oh, that's a good question, Christine. We're proud to have you, too. A very high percentage of Berkshire shares is owned by people with a very low tax basis, so that if I had to guess, I would say that probably 80% at least of the shares are owned by people whose cost is less than $100 a share on the A stock. And that undoubtedly contributes to some people's reluctance to sell, particularly if they're older. But I think it might make less difference than you think. I think most people, if there were a lower capital gains rate, I don't think it'd be a huge change in the propensity to sell the stock. I would hope, even if there was a zero capital gains tax, that there really wouldn't be any rush for the exits. It wouldn't affect my attitude particularly, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that as the tax rate goes down, there will be some greater tendency to sell by people with a low tax basis on their shares. Charlie?
Well, I think the laws of microeconomics and the laws of psychology are such that if you said the tax rate will, for 1 month, go down to zero, you would have some very dramatic effects in the markets. It's not going to happen, of course.
No, but if you said the tax rate was going to zero for 1 month and then going to 100% subsequently, I think you'd get a certain amount of activity.
Well, then you'd really... So you could tinker with the tax laws in a way that would cause dramatic market effects. I don't anticipate any such things happening. We had something similar back when they, what was it, 86? Where and the tax rate was 20% on long-term capital gains, and it was the last year you could liquidate a corporation and not pay gains taxes on appreciated assets that were disposed of in the liquidation, and we got a great flood of liquidations in that year. So it's possible to do things to the tax laws that have big market effects. I think it's very unlikely that any such thing is going to happen this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. Zone 2?
What number is this?
Is there a zone 2?
Is this it?
The microphone working? Oh, zone 3? Well, we'll go to zone 3 then.
That's what they
I am Charles Parcells from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. Very glad to be here. I'm a recent stockholder of Berkshire. I'm sorry to say that, but it does not diminish my admiration for past performance or my confidence in future performance. I heard recently a remark by, I think, a very successful investor whom I think worked with the Bass family in Texas for a while. And one of his comments, if I understand it correctly, said something like this. Hurricane Andrew destroyed the super cat industry. And that's about all he said, and I know we're into it. I'm interested in its importance to Berkshire and your comments on it, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger.
Yeah, I guess I would say I don't fully understand why he would, or even partially understand why he would say that. I mean, we are in business, in the super cat business, and I should explain, super cat business is very much like it sounds. I mean, we write insurance for for other insurance companies, other reinsurance companies, to protect them, to pay them at a time when something really big comes along, a super catastrophe. And Hurricane Andrew was certainly a super catastrophe. But that's the reason people do business with us. So we pay off infrequently, but we pay off big. And we paid off about $120 million at Hurricane Andrew. But if Hurricane Andrew happened today, well, at least when one of the policies in SEPs we have, we would certainly be paying off at least, $600-700 million, something like that. And if it happens 5 years from now, we'll pay off a lot more than that because we will undoubtedly be writing more business at that time. So it's just part of the game. And there will be super cats of various kinds. There will be, huge quakes. There will be more hurricanes than huge quakes. And when that time comes, we will write a big check. But that doesn't, prices may be firmer after such an event. They may not be. They didn't firm as much as you might expect after Andrew happened. Andrew was a huge surprise to people. As a digression, people in the insurance business thought that they all had these models, and some of them were prepared by reinsurance brokers and some of them by various research institutes, as how much they would lose under certain kinds of circumstances. And they couldn't have been further off with an Andrew or with the Northridge earthquake. Fortunately, we don't rely on those. I don't know what exactly we do rely on, but we don't rely on those. And the Hurricane Andrew was, that's part of business with Berkshire, and we will have another one, and we'll have another one after that. So every 3 or 5 or 7 years, or who knows what, we will lose significant money in the super cat business, and we expect that over 20 or 25 years we will make more money than we lose. We bring some real advantages to that business, as I wrote about in the report, and it makes sense for us to be in it. It only makes sense for us to be in it when the premium prices are right. But when they are appropriate, we're more than willing to step up and take on a fair amount of risk. As I wrote in the report on the California Earthquake Authority, we could tomorrow face a demand for roughly $1 billion, and we are prepared to write a check that day to take care of that, and we will write it if it happens. And there aren't very many people in the world that an insured can count on to do that. The interesting thing is that the worst exposures still for super cats are not borne by us, but they're borne implicitly by some very big direct writing companies that have lots of risk on Long Island or along the New Madrid Fault or other places. And they have got, millions of policies and maybe hundreds of thousands of exposed policies, and they don't think of themselves as being in the super cat business, or they really do, but they don't think day by day about it, and they are very exposed. Our exposures are limited to a given dollar amount. That dollar amount may be large, but at least we know what it is, and we take risks that we're willing to take risks when we think we're appropriately paid. There's a mentality to bring to the super cat business that's somewhat akin to what you bring to the investment business, so we think we're well equipped for it. Charlie?
Yeah, the $1 billion would be what, 2.5% or less of the liquid assets and securities around Berkshire, and so that's irritating, but it's not going to destroy the enterprise. Whereas if you have an unwitting super cat exposure that you don't even recognize you have, it could destroy your company. 20th Century, a very well-run direct writer of insurance, they all but went broke with the Northridge earthquake.
And they didn't think it was possible either.
And they had no idea they had a super cat exposure in what they thought was a simple little direct writing insurance operation. Now, I don't think we've got the main super cat risks at all at Berkshire.
GEICO lost something like 150 million in Andrew, and their initial estimate of the loss was like $35 million, and that's after they thought they'd heard about most of it. You can really get fooled in this business. In fact, 20th Century, which lost $1 billion at Northridge, just at the end of 1996, I think added $40 million, as I remember, to the reserves for the Northridge quake, which I think was in January of '94. Now, you'd think on an earthquake you'd kind of know when it was over, but you can get fooled. And down at Andrew, I mean, the costs of construction go up dramatically in an area that's been wiped out. And then there were all kinds of things in the codes. I mean, I think they started requiring architect's drawings on everything, over $5,000 in the way of repair, or some number like that. Don't hold me to the number. And of course, the architects had a field day, and then it turned out that everybody had a homeowner's policy. In the Oakland fire, for example, they all had a $300,000 book collection in their library, and who knows after the place is burned down. It's not. You get a lot of surprises in that field, and the surprises in insurance are never symmetrical. They're all bad. Zone 4.
Yes, my name is Jinting Wang. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm a shareholder. I have two questions. First, that in your 91 letter, you wrote that investors eventually repeat their mistakes. So what do you do to keep you from making the same mistake twice? And the second question is, in your 92 letter, you wrote that you attempt to deal with the problem of future earning in two ways. First is the business you understand, and the second is the margin of safety. And you said they are equally important. But if you cannot find the happy combination of faster growth at a low PE, which one do you think is more important, faster growth or low PE? That's my two questions.
I think we were told by some higher authority which one was more important there for a second. Well, they're bound together. Obviously, if you understood a business perfectly, the future of a business, you would need very little in the way of a margin of safety. So the more volatile the business is, or possibility is, but assuming you still want to invest in it, the larger the margin of safety. I think in that first edition of Graham and Dodd, if I remember, it was a J.I. Casey used and said, maybe it was worth somewhere between 30 and 110 or some number. He said, well, that sounds pretty. How much good does that do you to know that it's worth between 30 and 110? Well, it does you some good if it's selling below 30 or above 110. And you need a large margin of safety. Well, if you're driving a truck across a bridge that says it holds 10,000 pounds and you've got a 9,800-pound vehicle, if the bridge is about 6 inches above the crevice that it covers, you may feel okay. But if it's over the Grand Canyon, you may feel you want a little larger margin of safety in terms of only driving a 4,000-pound truck or something across. So it depends on the nature of the underlying risk. We don't get the margin of safety now that we got in a 1973-4 period, for example. The biggest thing to do is understand the business. If you understand the business and get into the kind of businesses where surprises, by the nature, surprises are few. And we think we're largely in that type of business. The earlier part about, I've said about learning from your mistakes, the best thing to do is learn from other guys' mistakes. I mean, it's like, Patton used to say, it's an honor to die for your country. Make sure the other guy gets the honor, So our approach is really to try and learn vicariously, but there's a lot of mistakes that I've repeated. I can tell you that. The biggest one, probably the biggest category over time, is being reluctant to pay up a little for a business I knew was really outstanding, or to continue to buy it at higher prices when I knew it was outstanding. So the costs of that have been in many, many billions. And and I'll probably keep making that mistake. The mistakes are made when there are businesses you can understand and they're attractive and you don't do something about it. I don't worry at all about the mistakes that come about because when I met Bill Gates, I didn't buy Microsoft or something. That's not my game. But the mistakes are made when most of our mistakes have been mistakes of omission rather than commission. Charlie?
Yeah, I think most people get very few what I call no-brainer opportunities, where it's just so damned obvious that this is going to work. And since they are very few and they may be separated by periods of years, I think people have to learn to have the courage and the intelligence to step up in a major way when those rare opportunities come by.
Yeah, you gotta be willing to take a really big bite, and it's crazy if you don't, and it's crazy if you dabble around at the edges so you're not prepared to take a big bite when the time comes. We apparently have lost mic 4, so we're just gonna use 3 mics from now on, and if you'll just make your way to those mics, we'll see how we do with them. How about zone 1?
Mr. Buffett, my name is Pete Brown from Columbus, Ohio, Class B shareholder. I had a couple questions if I could. The first is I don't have a very good idea in my mind how our typical insurance operations work. I mean, in particular, how money leaves the insurance pool and enters the investment pool, and how our operations are different than the typical run-of-the-mill insurance operation, around the country. Why are we able to generate so much more float than the XYZ company, somewhere else? And the second question is, it kind of goes back to an article you wrote for Fortune magazine back in the late 70s about the effect of inflation on equity values and that sort of thing. And in it you asserted that stocks and businesses were really like bonds. They just had their own par, and the par being the average 12% return on equity that companies have averaged. A company that does better than that has assets that are worth way more than 100 cents on the dollar. A company does less, will be less correspondingly. My question is, when you're projecting cash flows of a company as a prospective investment, why would you use the interest rate of risk-free treasury bills? Why wouldn't you use the sort of opportunity cost to discount it that maybe Charlie was referring to, maybe 12% return on equity of average corporations, maybe your 15% goal, maybe Coca-Cola's return on equity is a comparison. I mean, doing that would dramatically change the value of the company that you're evaluating, as I'm sure you know. Why would you use the risk-free rate is my question.
The risk-free rate is used merely to equate one item to another. In other words, we're looking for whatever is the most attractive. But in terms of present valuing anything, we're going to use a number, and obviously we can always buy the government bond, so that becomes the yardstick rate. It doesn't mean we want to buy government bonds. It doesn't mean we want to buy government bonds if the best thing we can find has a present value that's works out at 0.5% a year better than the government bond. But it's the appropriate yardstick in our view to simply use to compare across all kinds of investment opportunities, oil wells, farms, whatever it may be. Now it gets into a degree of certainty too, but it's the yardstick rate. It's not because we want to buy government bonds, but it does serve to make that a constant throughout the valuation process.
Yep.
In our insurance business, we really have a group of insurance businesses, and they have different characteristics. The consistent characteristic actually is that they're all very, very good businesses. Some of them are a lot larger and have opportunities to get larger, and some of them are not so large and have limited opportunities in terms of growth. But every insurance operation we have is a distinct asset to Berkshire. We've got smaller workers' comp operation. We've got a credit operation, credit card operation. We've got a home state operation. We have all these different businesses, Kansas Bank, Sureties, whatever. They're all good businesses. Some of them don't develop a lot of float relative to premium volume. The nature of Kansas Bankers Surety is that it won't develop a lot of float. It just happens to be the kind of business they write. The nature of comp is that it develops more float because comp claims pay more slowly. You really should think of each one of those having different characteristics. GEICO is entirely different than the super cat business. They're both good businesses. In terms of how we invest the money when it comes in, we invest it when it comes in. I mean, we'll get a large super cat premium today, it's invested. Now, if we have a claim tomorrow, then we disinvest, and in a substantial way. If you take something like GEICO, the cash flow is always going to be positive probably on that. We won't have another Hurricane Andrew because we've backed out of the homeowners business to quite an extent. So month by month, the money comes in at a GEICO, and the faster it grows, the more the money that comes in. We have so much capital that we can basically put that money into whatever makes the most sense for Berkshire. So we have none of either the mental or psychological constraints or regulatory constraints that many insurance companies operate under. Many of them think they sort of should have this portion and this portion and that and so on. Investments usually play second fiddle to the insurance business at most companies that are in the insurance business. We look at them as being of equal importance, and we run them as two distinct businesses. We do whatever makes most sense on the investment side, whatever makes the most sense on the insurance side. We never do anything on the investment side that will impinge on our business on the insurance side. But you really should look at each one of our businesses separately. GEICO has entirely different characteristics than the super cat business. They both call themselves insurance. They both develop float. But in economic terms and in terms of competitive strengths and that sort of thing, they're two very different businesses. And our smaller businesses are different businesses. Some of those may grow reasonably well. We'll keep working on it. Charlie?
Yeah, if you look at a corporate stock, it's obvious you can buy any maturity of government bond you want. So one opportunity cost of buying the stock is to compare it with the bond. But you may find that half the stocks in America you're so fearful about or know so little about or think so poorly of that you'd rather have the government bond. So on an opportunity cost basis, they're taken out of the filter. Now you start finding corporations where you like the stocks way better than government bonds. You've got to compare them one against the other, and when you find one that you regard as the best opportunity, that you can understand as the best opportunity, now you've got one to buy. It's a very simple idea, and it uses nothing but the most elementary ideas from economics or game theory. It's child's play as a mental process. Now, it's hard to make the business appraisals, but the mental process is essential.
If Charlie and I were told we had a choice of buying stock A, B, C, or D, and all 2,500 or 3,000 or whatever may be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, or buying a 10-year government bond and we had to hold the stock for 10 years or the bond for 10 years, probably in at least 80% of the cases we'd take the 10-year government. In many cases because we didn't understand the business well enough elsewhere, or secondly, we may understand it and still prefer the 10% government. But we would measure everything that way. And I don't know, did you come up with 80% or where, Charlie? Desert Island, 10 years? Get to fondle a stock certificate or fondle a government bond? Which one are you going to choose?
But anyway, I think life is a whole series of opportunity costs. You got to marry the best person who is convenient to find who'll have you. Investment is much the same sort of a process.
I knew we'd get in trouble after lunch. Zone 2.
Hello, Martin Wiegand, Bethesda, Maryland, stockholder. For myself, my family, and other small business owners, I want to thank you for the annual reports. They help a lot in helping us make business decisions and life decisions. My question is, many people come here to listen to you and to copy and understand your investment philosophy. But why don't more people, in your opinion, try to copy your investment vehicle, a corporation that pays no dividends?
Well, I don't really think if there were, I think there are other things that are probably better to copy about Berkshire, but they don't get copied either. It was always interesting to me how few people, everybody read Graham's, and they didn't really disagree with him. They just didn't like following him because it didn't promise enough in a sense. I mean, people really wanted something very quickly. In terms of not paying dividends, we don't pay dividends because we think we can turn every dollar we retain into more than a dollar of market value. I mean, the only reason for us to keep your money is if it becomes worth more by us keeping it than it would be worth if we gave it to you. And if we can create more than a dollar of market value for every dollar we keep, you're better off whether you want to take that dollar out by selling a little piece of your stock or whether you continue to leave it in. That's the test. If we come to the conclusion that we can't do that, and we could come to the conclusion sometime, then we should distribute it to you. The interesting thing is, we're in certain businesses, for example, See's Candy being one. We don't have a way to intelligently use all of the money that See's generates within the See's Candy Company. So if See's were a standalone company, it would pay very large dividends. Not because it just had some dividend paying policy. It would be simply because we wouldn't have a way of using, in this case, $30 million a year intelligently in expanding that business. The Buffalo News is the same way. We don't have a way of using money within that specific business intelligently to use the money that it generates. We hope that in the overall Berkshire Hathaway scheme of things, that we can intelligently use the money that the companies in aggregate generate for us. And we think so far we have, and we think the prospects are reasonably good that we can continue to do that. But dividend policy should really be determined by that criteria, also bearing in mind the possibilities of repurchase of stock too, but they should be determined by whether a dollar left in the business is worth more than to the shareholder than a dollar paid out. Someplace like Coca-Cola, if Coca-Cola had paid no dividends and simply repurchased shares and developed the bottling system and done the things that they have, the shareholders probably would have been even better off. They've been sensationally well off as it is, but they probably would have been even better off than they have been with the dividend policy they have had. And that's true for Gillette and Disney and companies of that sort that have got these terrific opportunities to use capital within the business or to repurchase shares of a company that simply can't be replaced. If that usually is the best use of capital, it's probably better than dividends. And we have written some about that, Martin, but people usually keep doing what they've been doing. They're hard to change. Charlie?
Well, it's interesting that you take that simple standard. You should retain money if you can make it worth more than it is by retaining it. That is not the standard thing that's taught in the corporate finance departments of our major universities. Why do we have this simple idea and they have another one? Time after time we find that so. I've tried to understand why they think the way they do, and I have great difficulty with it. I've just concluded that they're wrong, but that isn't enough. There has to be a reason why so many smart people are that wrong, and that's a story for another day. But there are things gravely wrong with American education that I hope that Berkshire Hathaway is slowly helping to fix.
Can you imagine if pick any one of you here, and let's say the two of us were in a business together, was earning $100,000 a year. How would we decide whether to leave the $100,000 each year? And it'd be exactly what we've talked about here. If we thought the $100,000 would translate into a present value of more than $100,000 by some action, we'd leave it in, and if it didn't, we'd take it out. And it doesn't seem to register generally. And incidentally, in our own case, we'll probably go too long before we come to the conclusion that we're not really using it that effectively, because there'll be a certain denial we'll go through, and we'll say, well, that was just temporary last year. But that is our approach, and we'll do our best to apply it. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, my name is John Shane. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. You touched on the subject of return on equity in response to a different question. I wonder whether you might be willing to elaborate along the following line. Right now, the Standard & Poor's 500 in aggregate have a return on equity of about 22%. The average over the decades for corporate America has been more like 12 or 13%. How did we get to this point of extraordinary profitability, and how likely do you think we are over the next 10 or 15 years to revert back to the mean of the low teens?
Well, I would say this. I never thought it would happen. So I start out with the fact that if you'd listened to me, you'd have been dead wrong if in terms of what the return on equity in 1996 or 1995, 1997 would be. It does not seem to me that 22% returns on equity are sustainable in a world where the long-term interest rate is 7%, and where the capability of saving large amounts in the economy are quite dramatic. You would just think that there would be some sort of leveling effect between 7 and the 22 you name, that as savings got directed within the economy and as the competitive forces operate that we've been taught will operate over time, would come into play. But I've been wrong on that subject, and that's why I say these levels are not unjustified if those kinds of returns can be made. Because let's just say that you had a 22% perpetual bond, and you had the ability, and let's say that a third of that coupon would be paid out. So you got a bond with a 22% coupon, and say 7% is paid out, being the dividend payout on the S&P, we'll say, and the other 15% is reinvested in more 22% bonds with similar characteristics. Now, what's that instrument worth on a present value basis in a 7% world? It's worth a lot of money. In fact, it's worth so much money that it becomes a mathematical fallacy at some point, because when the compound rate becomes higher than the discount rate, you get into infinite numbers, or you get into infinity, and that's a number. That's the concept we like to think about around Berkshire. We haven't figured out how to attain it. There's a book called The Petersburg Paradox, or there's an article called The Petersburg Paradox and the Growth Stock Fallacy. I think that's the name of it by a fellow named, I think, David Duran, written about 25 years ago. And it gets into this bit where the growth rate is higher than the discount rate. And it shouldn't work for an extended period of time, but it's sure fun while it's going on. Charlie?
Yeah, I think a couple of things contributed to this phenomenon that we so carefully mispredicted. Number one, it became very fashionable for corporations to buy in shares, and I think that we helped in a very small way bring on that enlightenment, and I think that was a plus in terms of rational corporate decision making. The other thing that happened is that the antitrust administration got way more lenient in allowing people to buy competitors, and I think those two factors helped raise returns on capital in the United States. And but that can't. You wouldn't think that could go on forever. And what 15% per annum compounded will do is grow way faster than the economy can grow, way faster than aggregate profits can grow over a long pull. So sooner or later something has to happen. I don't think we've reached a new order of things where the laws of mathematics are somehow repealed.
If real output in this country grows at, say, 3% a year, call it real GDP grows at 3% a year, and the capitalized value of industry in the country grows at 10% a year, at some point you get into mathematical absurdities. I mean, at the low inflation rates. You can't have if we have an economy that's 7 or 8 trillion now in GDP and 7 or 8 trillion in equity valuation, that may or may not make sense. But if you have one that's 15 billion in GDP and 75 billion in equity valuation, 75 trillion in equity valuation, you get to things that can't make any sense. So if you get these differential rates of growth among items that have some relationship, however tenuous or at least non-specific in the short run, it doesn't work after a while. And nobody wants to think about that. They don't want to think about their own death. But I mean, it doesn't go away just because you don't want to think about it. And we haven't gotten any point like that. But you can project out numbers, and they just won't make any sense after a while.
Yeah, corporate profits can't be 200% of GNP.
Yeah.
Indeed, they can't be 50% of GNP. So these high rates of compounding just go automatically into absurdity.
Yeah, they really can't be 20% of GDP or some number like that. So if you start saying you can't have a multiple of more, you get differential rates, and they just simply you leave the tracks after a while.
And all you people should be aware of this, because all the people who are professional sellers of investment advice and brokerage service, et cetera, have an immense vested interest in believing that things that can't be true are true.
Yeah,
and not only that, they've been selected in a Darwinian process to have formidable sales skills and large energy. And this is dangerous to the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, you've been selected to be the recipients of their advice.
Right. Furthermore, they figure out who we are and come in about 6 o'clock in the evening.
Zone 1 again.
Mike Assail from New York City. Could you explain a little more about what you've called the mind of the consumer and the nature of the product, and explain how you actually apply these concepts to find the companies with the growing demand and the best investment potential? And thank you for being two of the greatest professors I've ever had.
Thanks. What you really, when you get into consumer products, you're really interested in finding out or thinking about what is in the mind of how many people throughout the world about a product now and what it's likely to be in their mind 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Now, virtually every person in the globe, let's get it down to 75% of the people in the globe, have some notion in their mind about Coca-Cola. They have, the word Coca-Cola means something to them. RC Cola doesn't mean anything to virtually anyone in the world, but does with the guy who owns RC, but and the bottler, but everybody has something in their mind about Coca-Cola, and overwhelmingly it's favorable. It's associated with pleasant experiences. Now, part of that is by design. I mean, it is where you are happy. It is at Disneyland, at Disney World, and it's at ballparks, and it's every place that you're likely to have a smile on your face, including the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, I might add. And that position in the mind is pretty firmly established. And it's established in close to 200 countries around the world with people. A year from now, it will be established in more minds, and it will have a slightly different overall position. And 10 years from now, the position can move just a little bit more. It's share of mind. It's not share of market. It's share of mind that counts. Disney, same way. Disney means something to billions of people. And if you're a parent with a couple of young children and you got 50 videos in front of you that you can buy, you're not going to sit down and preview an hour and a half of each video before deciding what one to stick in front of your kids. You have got something in your mind about Disney, and you don't have it about the ABC video company, or you don't even have it about other You don't have it about 20th Century, or you don't have it about Paramount. So that name, to billions of people, including lots of people outside this country, it has a meaning. And that meaning overwhelmingly is favorable. It's reinforced by the other activities of the company. And just think of what somebody would pay if they could actually buy that share of mind, of billions of people around the world. You can't do it. You can't do it by $1 billion advertising budget or a $3 billion advertising budget or hiring 20,000 super salesmen. So you've got that. Now, the question is, what does that stand for 5 or 10 or 20 years from now? There'll be more people. There'll be more people that have heard of Disney. And that there will always be parents that are interested in having something for their kids to do. And that kids will love the same sort of things. And, that whoops. He emphasizes the key points when we get to those. But that is what you're trying to think about with the consumption product. That's what Charlie and I were thinking about when we bought See's Candy. I mean, here we were in 1972. We think we know a fair amount about candy. I know more than when I sat down this morning. I mean, I had about 20 pieces already. But, does their face light up on Valentine's Day, when you hand them a box of candy and say, it's some nondescript thing, and say, here, honey, I took the low bid, or something of the sort. And no, I mean, you want something, you've got tens of millions of people, or at least many millions of people that remember that the first time they handed that box of candy, it wasn't that much thereafter that they got kissed for the first time or something. So it's the memories are good, the association's good. Total process isn't just the candy. It's the person who takes care of you at Christmas time when they've been on their feet for 8 hours and people have been yelling at them because they've been in line with 50 people in line and that person still smiles at them. The delivery process, it's the shop in which they get all kinds of things. The treat we give them, it's all part of the marketing personality. But that position in the mind is what counts with a consumer product. And that means you have a good product, very good product. It means you may need tons of infrastructure because you got to have that. I had a case of cherry coke awaiting me at the top of the Great Wall when I got there in China. Now that you've got to have something there so that the product is there when people want it. And that happened in World War II. General Eisenhower, said to Mr. Woodruff that he wanted a Coca-Cola within arm's length of every American serviceman in the world, and they build a lot of bottling plants to take care of that. That sort of positioning can be incredible. It seems to work especially well for American products. I mean, people want certain types of American products worldwide. Our music, our movies, our soft drinks, our fast food. You can't imagine, at least I can't, a French firm or a German firm or a Japanese firm having that selling 47 or 48% of the world's soft drinks. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. It's part of something you could broadly call an American culture, and the world hungers for it. And Kodak, for example, probably does not have quite the same. George Fisher's doing a great job with the company. This goes back before that. But Kodak probably does not have the same place in people's mind worldwide quite as it had 20 years ago. I mean, people didn't think of Fuji in those days, we'll say, as being in quite the same place. And then Fuji took the Olympics, as I remember, in Los Angeles, and they pushed their way to more of a parity with the Kodak. And you don't want to ever let them do that. And that's why you can see a Coca-Cola or a Disney or companies like that doing things that you think, well, this doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. If you didn't spend this $10 million, wouldn't they still sell as much Coca-Cola? But, I quoted from that 1896 report of Coca-Cola and the promotion they were doing back then to spread the word. You never know which dollar is doing it, but you do know that everybody in the world that's virtually has heard of your product. Overwhelmingly, they've got a favorable impression on them, and the next generation is going to get it. So that's what you're doing with consumer products. With See's Candy, we are no better. We want to no better than the last person who's been served their candy with the last product they've been served. But as long as we do the job on that, people can't catch us. We can charge a little more for it because people are not interested in taking the low bid, and they're not interested in saving a penny a bottle on colas. Remember, we've talked about in these meetings private labels in the past. And private label is stalled out in the soft drink business, that they want the real thing. And 900 and some odd million 8-ounce servings will be served today of Coca-Cola product around the world. 900 million, and it'll go up next year, the year after. And I don't know how you displace companies like that. I mean, if you gave me $100 billion, and I encourage any of you who are thinking about that to step forward, but if you gave, and you told me to displace the Coca-Cola company as the leader in the world in soft drinks, I wouldn't have the faintest idea how to do it. Those are the kind of businesses we like. Charlie?
Yeah. I think the See's candy example has an interesting teaching lesson for all of us. Warren said it's the first time we really stepped up for brand quality, and it was a very hard jump for us who had been used to buying dollar bills for 50 cents. And the interesting thing was that if they had demanded an extra $100,000 for the See's Candy Company, we wouldn't have bought it. And that was after Warren had been trained under the greatest professor of his era and had worked 90 hours a week.
And eating a lot of chocolates, too.
Absorbing everything in the world. I mean, we just didn't have minds well enough trained to make an easy decision right. And by accident, they didn't ask the extra $100,000 for it, and we did buy it, and as it succeeded, we kept learning. I think that shows that the name of the game is continuing to learn, and even if you're very well trained and have some natural aptitude, you still need to keep learning, and that brings along the delicate problem. People sometimes talk about two aging executives. I don't know what the hell that means as an adjective, because I don't know anybody that is going in the other direction. But you people who hold shares are betting for a while at least until younger successors come along. You're betting to some extent on what we'll now tactfully continue to call aging executives continuing to learn.
If we hadn't have bought See's with some subsequent developments after that, because that made us aware of other things, we wouldn't have bought Coca-Cola in 1988. I mean, you can give See's a significant part of the credit for the, I guess, $11 billion plus profit we've got in Coca-Cola at the present time. Now you say, well, how could you be so dumb as not to be able to recognize a Coca-Cola? Well, I don't know, but
you're only drinking about 20 cans.
Yeah,
a day,
right. It wasn't I hadn't been exposed to it, it's amazing. But it just made us start thinking more. We saw how decisions we made in relation to See's played out in a marketplace and that sort of thing, and we saw what worked and didn't work, and it made us appreciate a lot what did work and shy away from things that didn't work. But it definitely led to a Coca-Cola, and we've had the good luck to buy some businesses themselves in their entirety that taught us a lot. We bought, and it's worked in the other direction. I mean, we were in the windmill business one time. Charlie stayed out of the windmill business, but I was in the windmill business and pumps and third level department or second level department stores, and I just found out how tough it was and how you could apply all kinds of energy to them, and it didn't do any good. It made a great deal of sense to figure out what pond to jump in, and what pond you jumped in was probably more important than how well you could swim. Charlie?
I don't think it's necessary that people be as ignorant as we were, as long as we were. I think American education could be better, but not in the hands of many of the people who are now teaching it.
Is there any group we've forgotten to offend? I mean, okay, zone 2.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. My name is Hudson Zhu, and originally from China, and I'm living in Kansas. And it's my honor to speak to you both. My question is, if someone like to form a company doing what you did 30 or 40 years ago, what is your suggestion to them? And would you share some of your wisdom with us? Thank you.
First thing we'd suggest they send us a royalty, but Charlie, you take over on that. You've thought more about starting over again than I have.
I want to frankly say that that's a question I ordinarily duck. I always believe in getting the fundamental mental tools in place. And I always believe in running reality as it comes in, preferably vicariously through the newspaper, etc., instead of through personal painful experience, through the filter of these sound ideas. And I not only think that works in life to create success, I think it makes life more fun. So I argue for sound thinking, but the exact specific techniques of turning yourself into another Warren Buffett, I leave to you.
Well, the one thing I would advise is I think there's a ton of opportunity out there, and I would do something I enjoyed. I wouldn't do something because I thought it was going to get me to a life I was going to enjoy later on, or because if I made a lot of money I was going to be a lot happier or anything like that. I've never done that, and I think that you will do well in what you enjoy, and I think it's crazy in life to endure a whole lot that I don't mean. Charlie and I worked in a grocery store. We didn't really jump up and down over it all the time, but in terms of it, making a commitment to really be in a business that you're only in it for the money, I think that's crazy. If we were in this only for the money, we'd have quit a long time ago, obviously. And it just you ought to have fun while you're doing it. It should not be jammed tomorrow and not jammed today. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think you'll get better results that way too. Zone 2? Or did we just do zone 2? I think we did. Yeah. Maybe zone 3.
Dave Uberg from Sac City, Iowa. And I haven't heard you on the moral and ethical considerations of stocks like ABC and Disney. They are now getting more and more criticism from mainstream religious groups in this country. Their reliance on sex and violence and their cronyism, homosexuality, and did they hear it?
I didn't. We didn't cut anybody off there.
Yeah, right.
What? But I would say that I'm delighted to have my grandchildren exposed to the full range of Disney product. I'd love to take them to Disneyland or Disney World, or take them to Disney movies or Disney videos. So, I think that the Disney company is being run in an absolutely first-rate way, and I have no problem whatsoever with gays being employed or receiving benefits or anything of the sort. Zone 1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett. Good afternoon, Mr. Munger. My name is Basuni Rima from Arlington, Texas. I see in the USA Today article about the shortage of labor in the state. And I was wondering, when you analyze a company, do you take that into consideration by choosing companies who's not dependent so much on labor? The second question is, I heard you in the beginning of the meeting that is so much capital coming from foreign country. You mentioned so many different countries who bought the Berkshire Hathaway, and I'm sure they buy all companies in the Dow. Do you feel like the analysts who analyze the Dow have that into consideration, that the Dow now is becoming as the Walmart of the security business in the world, where all the national of different country, they bypass their market, and they come in and buy in the United States, and as a result, that the idea of Mr. Greenspan as far as exuberant, it's mute, because if you remember how the Japanese, when they start to buy the real estate in America, they force us to pay high premium for the price, and I think that's what's going to happen in the market. And we as Americans who being accustomed to low PEs, now we're going to miss on, and the price is going to continue going up. And the third question is,
maybe we better stop at 2.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The second way, we pay very little attention. We don't pay any attention to capital flows. In other words, we don't really care who's buying or selling any security. Somebody is buying or selling each one. So obviously, there's, you could focus on the buyers, you could focus on the sellers, but you can say now that there's $20 billion in a month or so going into equity funds and all, but it doesn't make any difference to us. All we're interested in is what the business is worth, and what people are paying attention to in terms of capital flows or whatever, or market signals, or whether the Fed's going to move. That all changes. You remember 10 years ago it was M2 that everybody every whatever day of the week it was. What's M2 this week? I always thought of having a mystery, about whatever happened to M2 or so. But there's always something that people are talking about. There's so much time to fill with chatter, that and pages to fill, that they write about all these things that to us don't make much difference, because we don't care if the market closes for the next 5 years. We care how much Coca-Cola is sold 5 years from now, and what percentage of the world market they have, and what they're charging for it, and how many shares are outstanding, and that sort of thing. But we don't care who's buying or selling it in the least, except we like it when the company's buying it. The same way with Gillette, we care about whether people are trading up in the shaving experience. So capital flows and all of those macro factors that people like to write about a lot just have nothing to do with what we do. We're buying businesses. And I really think it is not a bad mindset whenever you buy a stock to say, would I be happy buying this stock if the market closed for 5 years? Because then you're buying a business if you say yes to that. If you don't say yes to that, you may not be focusing on the proper thing. By its nature, the U.S. is running a substantial trade deficit, merchandise trade deficit. If you buy more from the rest of the world than you're selling them, which is what happens when you're running a trade deficit, you have to balance the books. I mean, they get something in exchange, and what happens is they get some sort of capital asset in exchange. They may get a government bond, they may get a piece of the U.S. business or something, but the key thing in economics, whenever somebody makes some assertion to you about economics, you always want to say, and then what? In fact, it's not a bad idea to say it about everything in life, but you always have to say, and then what? So when you read that the merchandise trade deficit is $9 billion, what else does that mean? Well, it means that somehow we have to have created $9 billion of capital assets, claims on our production in the future, with somebody else in the world. So they have to invest. They don't have any choice. When somebody says, won't it be terrible if the Japanese sell all their government bonds? They can't sell all their government bonds without getting something else in exchange. They get some other American asset in exchange, because there's no other way to do it. They can sell it to the French, but then the French have the same problem. So trace through where the transactions go anytime someone starts talking about one specific action in economics. Question about labor. Generally speaking, obviously, we like a business with low labor costs, but we like a business with low costs of every kind, because the rest is profit. So it would be true that on balance we would not be high on labor-intensive companies, but there's some very good businesses that are labor-intensive. But if you say, would I rather have a labor-intensive business or a non-labor-intensive business, and everything else is equal, the answer is the less labor-intensive business. Charlie, you want to comment on either one?
No, I don't think I've got anything more.
Area 2?